Today on Rethink Real Estate, we're talking about the words I think. I think is the same as I hope. Hope you enjoy. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. The words that I'm hearing a lot lately is I think. And I'm using this as an example of just agents' lack of understanding of where their clients are at. And I understand that the marketplace is at the moment, in my eyes anyway, and you might not like where I think that this is going, is that I think it's going to be a tougher year than what we all expected. There's no doubt about that. It's certainly in my mind at the moment, like in some of the major areas that we're getting to do quite a lot of business with, like Florida, like that is like Southern Florida marketplace is unbelievably difficult at the moment. You know, the Colorado marketplace, you know, the greater Denver area, definitely a difficult area. Arizona, you know, in the Scottsdale and greater market there, definitely a difficult area. There's a lot of difficult areas. There's no doubt about it. And the market's acting really strange. But the thing that I'm definitely hearing more and more of from agents is I think that the seller will accept this. And I think is the same as saying I hope. And it's interesting as we dive into things and as we go into deeper conversations around, you know, having to lean into the discomfort of most conversations around price with your sellers, is that is something that I'm definitely having to do more and more now for agents. And it's funny, you know, the relationship that we have with white label agents that haven't done many auctions with us and that you're meeting for the very first time. You know, there was definitely, call it for the last 12 months, is that agents don't like the conflict that when you ask a seller direct question, you do it politely. It's like, hey, I know your original reserve was X, but now the market's saying X and it's less. How do you feel about that? And having that conversation with that listing agent on the phone with the seller, it's funny how uncomfortable they have become with it. And I do believe it's because the real estate market over the last number of years has been obviously quite decent, is that those muscles or those thoughts or those skill sets have definitely not been used, and we're having to dust them off if anybody had those skill sets at all at one point. But that being said, is that when I'm having direct conversations with the agents, I'm saying to them is that, hey, well, look, seller's reserve price is X. What are your thoughts around the value of the property? And they're like, well, I think that the seller will accept this. And when I dive into that conversation with the sellers at that point, it is completely off. And I think is just a complete hope strategy that people are not really embracing the nature of that. What will they take, and not leaning into the conversation of every time that you communicate with the sellers, be like, hey, I understand that originally when we spoke, your expectations are X. Are they still that at this point? And asking questions like that, I think that we're avoiding having those conversations. I think that maybe we're not avoiding, maybe we just don't remember to have them at the moment. Maybe we just don't remember how to do it. Maybe we need to get very comfortable with some format of some process and outlining it, because I think is not good enough, because it's simply I hope. And having a third party come into the situation like myself allows us to have those conversations, because I want to know, I have to know, in the sense that Mr. Seller, like what will you take for the property X? And if there was evidence to prove to you that the marketplace wasn't there for that amount of money, are you open to listening to that? Well, no, I'm not. That is what I need. Okay, well, explain your circumstance a little bit more to me, because I just really want to understand it, and we can evaluate whether or not now is the right time. And again, that's part of our process. It's not the promise of a price. It is a process to find the value of the marketplace and have all the leverage doing so. And that's something that a lot of people don't understand, is that auction, you always have leverage regardless of whether you have one buyer or you have 10 buyers. It doesn't matter. You always have that leverage leading into the live auction event. And it does allow, that timeline allows us to have conversations with the sellers, because if we get to the auction date and we have nobody, we have to have a conversation about what are we going to traditionally price it at. And when that conversation is, well, I'm going to price it at the same price that I wanted, but we hadn't been able to sell it at the bidding to start from, it provokes these conversations to go, well, Mr. Seller, if I haven't been able to sell it at $900,000, what do you think putting it on at $1.1 million is going to do? It's probably not going to go well for you. And that's the part of this process that forces me at all times not to say I think, it's to want to know, because there's a timeline on me and a timeline on the process to have these types of conversations. And I just don't think hope is the strategy that we should be taking in any way, shape, or form at this point. I think that we need to know. And even if you're not doing auctions, one of the greatest things that we ever started doing with our auctions is setting the seller's non-disclosed reserve price up front. And I have to be honest, is that when we do that, is that there's so many agents that are so surprised when a seller sets a reserve price that's far lower than they ever expected what the seller was going to accept. And that happens because, again, to map out the situation is that traditionally properties on the marketplace for X amount of dollars, and then it goes down the path of price reductions, or it doesn't sell, and then we reach out to the agent and they're like, oh yeah, well, we'll explore it. It sounds better than simply doing another price reduction. And we go and we sit down with the sellers, we explain process, and then they're like, oh yeah, this sounds good, I want to give it a shot. And then it's a pretty simple conversation. Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we need to set a reserve price, and your reserve price needs to be at a level that I know that you will accept. And we need to have full transparency in the sense of, yes, it's a number there to protect you. Yes, you can adjust it at all times. But that being said, is that what is your bottom number that I know that you would, like, at the end of the day, you would walk away. You wouldn't be happy, but you know that, you've gotten an amount that you can move on with. And that number is many times a few $100,000 less than the list price, and the agent is just absolutely shocked. And to be honest, they probably didn't need us. They probably just needed to have that conversation, and they would have actually got a sizable price reduction. They would have been like, they might have been scared to recommend something to them, but that's a larger nature. Or it's that good news situation where you keep making good news so that therefore you don't have to have that conversation, and the clock keeps ticking. And without an auction date or a crescendo point, those conversations get prolonged. They get tucked away because the seller doesn't want to have them with you, and you don't want to have them with the sellers. So that provocative nature of what auction is allows us to never be in a position of, I think, it's always knowing, because we need to know. And part of that process is giving them an answer of, is now the right time to sell for you? And if it is now, you have to sell it now, then what is that amount that the market's willing to bear? And that's part of our efficiency in the process, but it's also something that you don't need the auction process to do. You've got to set your timelines yourself. Maybe the deadline's an internal deadline for your real estate business, that 30 days is the mark, because we know that there's a 70% chance that if it hits 30 days, it will still be there in 60 days' time. So maybe 30 days is your mark that you know that you're leading towards, that if you do hit that and you haven't had the adjustment conversations that you need to, maybe your own internal processes need to be there as well. And that needs to be mapped out, that every 2 weeks you sit down with your seller and you talk to them about their expectations versus what the feedback is. And maybe that's the nature of that. Maybe you're even more efficient in the sense that every time that you do talk to your seller, it's a conversation of that, hey, just to be clear, when we first started off this, your goal was to get X. Has that changed based on any information that I've given you? Being able to have that conversation. And if the seller, and if there is information there that they should have grasped and they should have seen when you ask them, hey, have you seen any information that might change the way that you think about what you're looking to get? And they say no, and you've seen that information that you've put in front of them, you're doing the weekly reports, you're doing the feedback meetings, you're doing all of those different things, and you're pointing out the patterns and the trends around feedback, but they're not listening to it, then that is your permission to point that out. And that is the difference between somebody that says, I think, okay, versus, well, I know they won't take it. I'd rather know they wouldn't take a number, okay, versus think that they might take something and have false hope. Either way, guys, let's not think, let's know. Thanks so much. So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.